Welcome to the voice of Ibrahim Traoré, the channel where truth meets strategy and every story reveals the sharp edge of power, betrayal, and survival. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Today, we uncover a breathtaking tale of glamour, espionage, and assassination attempts, a night that began with elegance and nearly ended in tragedy. This is the untold story of how Captain Ibrahim Traoré outwitted three elite assassins posing as international models at a cultural gala. Let's begin. The Grand Palace of Ouagadougou shimmered with gold-trimmed banners and chandelier light as the cultural gala commenced, a celebration of African art and international unity attended by diplomats, dignitaries, celebrities, and carefully selected media. At the heart of the room, a long banquet table stretched under velvet drapes, and seated at its center was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in ceremonial uniform, flanked by ministers and foreign cultural envoys. The event was meant to be symbolic, a demonstration that Burkina Faso was not just a battlefield but a beacon of refinement, heritage, and peace. And yet, within this brilliance, danger hid behind mascara and smiles. Just before the second course was served, three women entered from the eastern archway, tall, graceful, radiant, introduced by the French cultural attaché as special international guests from Milan, Paris, and Madrid. They were seated strategically, one directly to Traoré's right, one across, and the third diagonally positioned, all within close proximity. Their names were unknown to most, but their presence sparked murmurs, cameras clicking subtly. Traoré offered a polite nod, but behind his composed demeanor, a flicker of calculation emerged. As a trained soldier, his instincts had long been honed to detect more than beauty. The woman to his right, tall, auburn hair, speaking fluent French with a soft Italian accent, leaned toward him during the wine service. Her perfume was understated. Her eyes, however, lingered too long. There was a tension in her shoulders, barely perceptible but enough to register. Mr. President, she began with a smile. Such a beautiful night for peace, isn't it? Traoré smiled but did not answer. His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, just enough to spot the flower pinned to her dress. A white lily. Standard enough, except the stem's base had been clipped unnaturally and fitted with a tiny metallic clasp. His blood chilled. That was no flower. Immediately, he leaned back and tapped the inside of his watch, twice a silent alert code. Across the room, his personal security chief received the signal. Traoré turned to the woman. "Excuse me, I have forgotten to greet the ambassador from Niger." He stood casually, nodded to his security staff, and made a slow pass around the room. The women stayed seated, composed, watching him. But in that glance, their game was exposed. They had been trained not only to kill but to adapt quickly. 5 minutes later, discreet plane operatives surrounded the table. A security sweep was conducted under the pretense of routine protocol. Within seconds, a concealed microneedle laced with neurotoxin was discovered in the flower of the first woman. The second carried a fine wire garrote sewn into her handbag strap. The third had a ceramic blade embedded in her shoe heel. Traoré returned to the center of the room as gasps echoed across the gala. Cameras had been ordered off. The three women were restrained discreetly and escorted through a back corridor. He raised the glass calmly and announced, "To a peace which must always be guarded with wisdom." The audience applauded, unaware of how close death had come. The interrogation room, deep beneath the Presidential Security Bureau, was purposefully sterile, windowless, humming with quiet tension. Asterisk as the three captured women sat handcuffed. At the steel table, flanked by two armed officers, behind the one-way glass, Captain Ibrahim Traoré observed in silence. Asterisk his eyes narrowed not in anger, but in the cold focus of a man dissecting an enigma. Asterisk, and though they had entered the gala as models, now stripped of glamour and stripped of name, their postures betrayed years of elite conditioning. Asterisk no panic, no defiance, only control. Asterisk across the table, Colonel Idrisanu paced slowly, speaking and alternating French, Italian, and Spanish, probing for linguistic cracks, analyzing micro-expressions, cross-referencing them with psychological profiling data pulled from Interpol's restricted files. Asterisk, and after hours of verbal fencing, they remained silent, but machines did not lie. Fingerprint traces, gait analysis, and forensic triangulation matched them with names flagged by 3 intelligence agencies, not as criminals, but as assets previously believed to have died or vanished after European covert operations gone wrong. Asterisk, and the truth began to unravel. Asterisk, these women were graduates of an off-the-books facility in southern France, known in rumor alone as the Orchard, a paramilitary training compound disavowed by its financiers, but long suspected by African intelligence of grooming high official foundation and female operatives for targeted political elimination. Asterisk, and as this revelation surfaced, Traoré summoned his core advisory unit to an emergency midnight briefing, outlining a web of offshore foundations, diplomatic shell companies, and falsified humanitarian missions that had all funneled resources into the Orchard's operations. Asterisk, and with grim clarity, the room accepted the reality. This was not merely an assassination attempt. Asterisk, it was the opening move of a broader, coordinated campaign to silence independent African leadership. Asterisk, and so Traoré authorized what he called shadow prosecution, bypassing formal diplomatic channels to conduct a covert, international sweep for anyone tied to the Orchard's command hierarchy. Asterisk. But before that, he returned to the interrogation room alone, dismissing his team, and sat across from the ringleader Delphine Morrow, now confirmed through retinal scan to be the same woman who had once infiltrated a NATO peacekeeping base in Kosovo. Asterisk, and with a calmness that masked a storm within him, Traoré asked Asterisk, "Why me?" To which she responded with a chilling smile, "Because you stopped being predictable." And he understood then that it wasn't personal. It was strategic. Asterisk. He represented an anomaly in a system that had grown comfortable with docile leadership. Asterisk, and when he leaned forward and said, Asterisk, tell your handlers I'm only just beginning. She paused and whispered, "They know and they're afraid." And that was all he needed to hear. For later that night, a digital warrant was dispatched through the secure network of the Pan-African Intelligence Coalition, triggering surveillance actions in 5 embassies and the quiet freezing of 22 international bank accounts suspected of laundering payments for black ops missions. And by dawn, coordinated raids had begun across 3 continents, with field agents tracing encrypted communication relays back to logistics companies, cultural NGOs, and even a Mediterranean vineyard, which, on paper exported wine, but in truth housed a silent training ground where women like Delaney were molded. Asterisk, and as this shadow war escalated, Traoré maintained his public routine, attending agricultural summits and university lectures, knowing the cameras would project calm, while his enemies watched for signs of fracture. But behind the scenes, he crafted the next phase, Operation Rootfire, and drafted a single directive on encrypted parchment: if they grow from orchards, we burn the soil. Asterisk, and with that, the countdown to his most audacious counterstrike began. Operation Rootfire began not with a bullet but with a pen when Ibrahim Traoré signed a midnight directive that greenlit simultaneous multi-agency operations across 5 African capitals and 2 European cities, authorizing full-spectrum counterintelligence, raids, asset seizures, and electronic warfare maneuvers targeting anything and anyone linked to the orchard. And over the following 72 hours, a war was waged in silence. Embassies had their power cut under the guise of maintenance. Encrypted, servers vanished into diplomatic pouches that never reached their destinations. And in cities like Accra and Dar, boutique art galleries and wellness centers were quietly shuttered by masked agents after being exposed as orchard-run fronts used to move funds and personnel under cultural cover. And in the chaos, one name kept surfacing. Luca Arva, a former European military contractor turned ghost fixer, who, according to intel, was the current head of the orchard's African operations, operating under deep cover through a charity for post-conflict trauma relief. Based in Lisbon. And once this link was confirmed, Traoré escalated Rootfire to its final phase, dispatching an elite Burkinabe special operations team to Portugal under diplomatic protection while simultaneously feeding misleading intelligence to European media suggesting the president had postponed all travel due to a domestic economic emergency. And while the world watched press conferences, his strike team moved like smoke through Lisbon's Alama district, arriving at a centuries-old building that housed the Lucia Foundation, whose upper floors were rigged with escape routes, encrypted hardware, and biometric locks, all of which were overridden in 12 minutes. And inside, agents uncovered a war room, maps with red pins across Nairobi, Kigali, Addis Ababa, and Ogugu, dossiers labeled Terminate or Dissolve. And at the center, a live relay of audio chatter between Verhoeven and 2 unknown handlers in Brussels, who terminated the call the moment agents breached the firewall. But it was too late. Their voices had been recorded, their locations triangulated, and as the sun rose over the Tagus River, Verhoeven was flown to a classified black site where his first words upon seeing Traoré were, "You weren't supposed to survive." To which Traoré calmly replied, "Neither was your network." And by the end of that week, 21 more covert operatives across the continent had been detained, 10 diplomatic credentials revoked, and several NGOs banned after evidence showed they had funneled money into intelligence laundering disguised as development programs. And still, Traoré did not announce victory because Rootfire was never about optics. It was about decapitation. And with its core leaders neutralized, its infrastructure burned, and its reputation shattered, the orchard ceased to exist as a global threat. But not before Traoré took one final step. He declassified just enough documents to share with trusted African journalists, empowering them to tell the story not as propaganda, but as history. And when the headlines broke Traoré unmasks, foreign plot against Africa's citizens across the continent rallied not just in Burkina Faso, but in Kinshasa, Bamako, and Lusaka, holding vigils, planting trees, and pledging unity against foreign interference. And watching these images from a small private chamber in Kudugu, Traoré said nothing. He only stood and walked to his desk where a map of Africa hung pinned above his chair. And beneath it, in his own hand, he wrote one word in red ink: sovereignty, knowing that what had been defended in a ballroom with a glance had now been secured across a continent through the unrelenting precision of truth. Silence and fire. A year had passed since that fateful night, and yet the echoes of the cultural gala continued to reverberate across the geopolitical landscape of West Africa. The Grand Palace of Ouagadougou once again opened its gates not for celebration, but for declaration. The air carried a crisp stillness as foreign dignitaries, regional heads of state, and a new generation of Burkinabe citizens gathered beneath its ornate chandeliers. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, standing taller than ever in the eyes of the people, returned to the place where 3 assassins had tried to end his life, this time not as a target, but as a teacher, a leader, and a sentinel of sovereignty. The gala had become a turning point in more than just Burkina Faso's political history. It was a lesson in vigilance, resilience, and the price of independence. In the months that followed Operation Rootfire, Traoré had overseen the declassification of thousands of documents tied to the orchard. He launched educational campaigns to teach youth about modern subversion tactics and introduced sweeping intelligence reforms that turned his once fractured agencies into one of Africa's most trusted security networks. But what struck the international community most was his decision not to seek vengeance. Instead of secret executions or retaliatory strikes, Traoré chose transparency and exposure, letting the truth travel faster than bullets ever could. His speeches, broadcast across more than a dozen countries, called for an Africa that watched its borders, its contracts, and its alliances with equal scrutiny. At the heart of his message was one radical idea: Africa must no longer be the playground of foreign designs. That night at the palace, Traoré's keynote was not grand or theatrical, it was deliberate, almost intimate. He recounted the moment. He sensed danger from a glance, the split-second instinct that saved his life, and the courage it took not to react emotionally but tactically. They dressed it in beauty, he said, but what they brought was poison. And what we gave them back was clarity. The room erupted not in applause, but in solemn respect. After the address, Traoré did not linger in the limelight. He met privately with a select group of intelligence cadets, young men and women handpicked from across the continent, many of them survivors of disinformation campaigns, smear plots, or proxy conflicts. He told them, truth is your first weapon, violence is your shield, and instinct, that is your alarm. Trust it. But for Traoré, the battle did not end with the dismantling of a network. It continued in the quieter moments, redesigning embassy, vetting procedures, renegotiating international treaties, rejecting conditional aid masked as assistance. He knew that the orchard had merely been a symptom. The disease was deeper, the belief that Africa could still be steered by invisible hands. With every reform, every quiet reshuffle, every bold refusal of external manipulation, Traoré was setting new doctrine, one where leadership meant foresight, not fear, and where diplomacy no longer meant compromise without clarity. His cabinet evolved, with new ministries focusing on digital sovereignty, cultural fortification, and youth resilience. Meanwhile, the captured operatives from the gala remained alive, protected under international conventions, yet interviewed regularly, their stories becoming essential case studies and training memos. Delphine Morrow, the would-be assassin turned linchpin of an entire intelligence expose, was now a symbol of caution in textbooks titled The Modern Saboteur, her legacy not erased, but repurposed as a warning. In a small glass-encased corner of the National Museum, the flower she wore that night was displayed beside the poison microneedle. Beneath it, a single engraved line read, even beauty can be a weapon. Even silence can be a shield. For Traoré, these objects were not trophies. They were memories, proof that power, when unguarded, invites predators, but when awakened, builds walls of vision no blade can pierce. As the evening drew to a close and guests departed under strengthened watch, the city lights of Ouagadougou flickered like stars, reflecting a new dawn. Asterisk, a journalist asked Traoré before he stepped into his car. What would you say to those still plotting against your life? He looked at the horizon and answered, Tell them I no longer wait for danger to knock. I meet it halfway, and I bring the truth with me. Thank you for watching this powerful 4-part story here on The Voice of Ibrahim Traoré. Asterisk, if this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes, please subscribe and share it with others who believe in truth, leadership, and the courage to face hidden enemies. Asterisk, until next time, stay aware, stay free. And never forget that one leader's intuition can change the fate of a continent. Asterisk. If you follow the story and believe in a future where African nations speak with one voice, stand on their own feet, and reclaim their own narrative, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to our channel, The Voice of Ibrahim Traoré, and be part of a growing movement that believes in truth, dignity, and sovereignty. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning.